next presenter is Brad Brockmann. He's the executive director of the Center for Prisoner Health and Human Rights, and he's going to share his story of transformation with us.
The working title of this is My Schizoid Life, a Journey Through and to Service. Growing up, it was always like there were two of me. I started as the golden boy, who could do no wrong, who was really loved by everyone, admired as a kid. My first life lesson was learning that in order to be loved, I needed to be perfect. And I was. Until I wasn't. Moving along with this perfect golden boy was a kid who knew there was something very wrong with him. Something really ugly and awful. I knew at a really young age that I was really attracted to men. That there was something I needed, wanted, that I wasn't getting. And I also knew, growing up in the 50s, that this was really wrong. And as I came more and more to understand this part of myself, well, not to understand it, but to looking back and seeing this kid inside the golden boy, who was gnarly and deformed and scared and just couldn't stand. Knew that he was something wrong, that if people saw him, he would be rejected. Knew that if they knew what he really wanted, who he really was, golden boy would be exiled. So, and it was in fact in church one day, when I was 10, taking notes for the communion class, and a woman turned around and told me to shh, I'd done something. And I went inside and I knew if she really knew who I was, if they knew who I was in this church, I would be out. I knew I really wanted those little kids, not kids, I wanted older men, these 18, 19-year-olds. And in fact, at the age of 8, 9, I was actually having sex with them. And this was this gnarly little kid started to drink at 13, did pot, LSD throughout high school. But Golden Boy somehow managed to keep it together. It was really amazing. And I still don't understand how. I was a star in school. I was really successful. People looked up to me. There was a part of Golden Boy that thrived on people coming to him, where he could help. But it was not help in a healthy way. It was help in a needy, please don't let me become that total gnarly thing that I know really exists inside of me. So it was something I held on to. So there was this sort of this Madonna horror complex, quite literally, that existed here. And that schizoid break continued throughout. Most of my life has been about trying to connect those parts, those pieces. I actually came to Brown, never understood why they let me in, but continued this life of the golden boy who realized more and more that he was this fraud. That beneath this facade was this little scared, hurt kid. But the pretense was kept up, and I got out. I worked as a journalist in Taiwan for a while, but the thing even there, the thing that really appealed to me was smuggling that I got involved with. Nothing illegal or too illegal, watches, cameras. The appeal of that which was illegal was really never far from the surface. So I came back to the States and went to law school, University of Michigan. Eventually made it then to Wall Street, to one of the top law firms. The pretense was really good, obviously, but deep inside there was this broken part, really broken. Eventually, in the late 80s, my mom died, and what would be classified by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross as not a good death. There was no closure. She kept her dying process from us. And at the same time, the circle of AIDS was getting closer and closer and closer to me. People were dying around me. And friends of friends, and slowly it became here. A friend got AIDS, didn't die, still is alive, but I realized that there was something more. The lawyer was now really empty, no matter what the pretense was at Paul, Weiss, Rifkin, Wharton and Garrison, Cleary, Gottlieb, Steen and Hamilton, some of the top law firms in New York. I never loved that work, ever, and was always searching for something to do from here, from my heart. As that circle of death came closer and closer, and after my mother's death, I realized that I really needed to understand what was going on, and fearful that my friends might actually die. So I started working in hospice in the evenings, doing hospice work with the dying. And it was beautiful. It was an opportunity to put the pretense aside and really begin to understand and connect with strangers in a completely different way, having them open up, giving me a gift, giving them ostensibly a gift. So more and more service was really what I was called to do, even though I didn't really understand it at all. My father died as my last surviving parent in the late 90s. And I managed to get a job as the Assistant Deputy Commissioner for Housing for large-scale planning of New York City. Golden Boy is elated. And I think that, well, if I keep up the hospice work and do other stuff, it'll be enough. It'll be enough. It'll be enough. It'll be enough. So, through a series of wonderful miracles, I signed up. I'm studying Spanish at this point, to go and work in Mexico for 3 months at an AIDS hospice in Mexico City. It seemed like the perfect thing to do. Perfect service. About a month before I'm ready to leave, I get a call from my putative boss, the man who would be my boss, and learn that the job has been withdrawn. There's a hiring freeze. He had forgotten to call me when it actually happened, so I had already quit my one job, and so I had a huge decision ahead of me what to do. And I took a leap off a cliff and decided I would go to Mexico anyway. And so the 3 months turned into 2 years. Over 2 years, I worked at the AIDS hospice, and that didn't work out because there were all sorts of problems with it. So, and I'm still battling with this little gnarly part of myself, the part that's frightened and knows that it's a real fraud. If somebody saw me for who I was, forget it. So, in looking for more service work, I went to a place called El Árbol de la Vida, the Tree of Life, which was really a home for the destitute in Mexico City, where people would be dropped off. There was a kid there, Ricardo, who his parents had dropped him off at 10 and left him. He had some serious mental health problems. There were people there dying from AIDS. There were elderly who nobody wanted to take care of. There were people with all sorts of problems, of issues in this place. I didn't really know that at the time. And it was a place with no resources. The only medicines that they had were things that they got from the local pharmacy that had been outdated. There was no real, as in this country, systemized healthcare for the poor. So I walk through these 2 lines of chairs with people sitting in them in various states of what seemed to me at the time sort of just complete being out of it. There was a woman there who was knitting with no needles. There were a few people whose heads were drooping, saliva coming out of their mouths. It was a place of real destitution. There was nobody there really helping. I turned a corner, and there was a gathering while I was waiting for the head of the organization to come of the individuals who were there in what I later learned was a 12-step program, Enfermos Anonymous, Patients Anonymous. And it was one of the only ways that they got help and support was with one another. Individuals would get up, talk about how their day had been, how their pain had gone away, how the soup was really wonderful. They would get up and testify and applaud, and the next person would get up. The last person I saw who got up couldn't even speak. He got up and was, tells a story through gesture, through movement, through the sounds of his voice, and applause, and you can just see the beauty of what's happening. Golden Boy is freaking out more and more and more. Golden Boy is seeing. How can Golden Boy be golden in a place like this? This place has nothing. I am really getting scared. The woman who's running the place, a 21-year-old who had just taken over because her father had died, comes to me. We go on a tour. She takes me through the different rooms to the soup kitchen where volunteers are making food. We go up to the second floor where there are some stores and a huge room full of beds. This is a converted warehouse. Included in there, there's a man with HIV who's clearly on his last legs, next to a woman in her 80s, happy, unable to move. The whole place was filled with just people at the end of the line. I'm freaking out more and more and more. We go up to the third floor to where her office is in the storeroom. She takes me into the storeroom. One side, canned milk, some goods, really, really, really basic stuff. On the other side is a wall of plastic coffins that they had gotten donated by a local funeral parlor. Now I'm really freaking out. And wanting with every ounce of my soul to get out of there. This is a really scary place. I can't do anything here. What am I doing here? Let me go. I'm seeing all of my fears. I'm seeing little gnarly boy lying in a bed, afraid of dying of AIDS. I'm seeing little gnarly boy sitting there, afraid of abandonment. I'm seeing all of my fears laid out there, and I'm freaking out. I've got to get out of there. With every ounce of my body, I am getting out of there, having a lovely conversation. Oh yes, I'll be back. What can I do? Get me out of here. As I'm leaving through the gauntlet, where my fears are neatly displayed, wanting just to get out. As I pass Ricardo, he slowly raises his hand. He isn't asleep. He's quite aware. He raises his hand and moves it slightly and looks up at me and says, "Adios." Adios. To God. Gracias. And next to him, the lady raises her hand, gets a smile on her face. Thank you. Adios. I have done nothing. I want to get out of there with every ounce of my soul, and they are thanking me. I am being thanked. For what? For what? I get out on the street and I lose it completely. I don't know what is going on, and I realize that the first part of service, the key lesson of service, is showing up. My walking in the door was huge difference. Little would I know. That was all that was needed here. Nothing could be done to fix this. It would have been impossible. And I realized that I was facing my fears, all of my fears there. And I knew I had to go back. About a month later, I do go back. And huge step for me to go through the doors again and realizing that this, in certain respects, is me, as everyone around us is a mirror of who we are. But that's not all who I am. So I go in and I begin volunteering, working with a young woman named Claudia. Claudia is 24, has advanced AIDS at this point. Claudia had gotten AIDS from her boyfriend when she was 16. She had an 8-year-old daughter who was being raised by her mother as her own. Didn't know that Claudia was her mother. And as was common at that time, someone with AIDS, with HIV, was essentially banished from the home as soon as there was any sign of illness or regression. So I became Claudia's friend, the person who would come and visit her, showing up, thinking, oh, this is service. Claudia eventually gets sick. She goes to the hospital for the destitute. And in this place, the only thing she gets is a bed and food. No medications. I buy her, when she becomes incontinent, I get her diapers. The doctors would occasionally pitch in to get some medicine. She gets CMV, she gets all sorts of opportunistic infections, begs me to buy her some medicine. I can't, I'm like freaking, what can I do? And it's so much in me to, again, not go, not to visit, not to do this anymore. But I know that I'm the only person who's visiting at this point. And so I keep going and take it as a blessing when she finally succumbs and goes into a coma, still alive, still quite beautiful. Oh my God. I go one day, and she's not there, and they say she's gone home to El Árbol de Vida for her last few weeks. And I arrive at El Árbol de Vida, and I open the door, and there is a plastic coffin with Claudia inside. This wasn't service either. Not service of the kind that we need to do. A key mantra in doing service work is understanding that service is for the greater good of all, for the people who are being served and for yourself. And if you're not being served, if whatever it is that you're doing is not fulfilling you, you're not doing service in the best way possible, because how can you live through that? I gave myself permission to finally leave El Árbol de Vida. I ended up going down to Chiapas and doing human rights work with the Zapatistas and having my whole life blown open. And finally seeing and understanding the Jesus who had eluded me, taking those notes in church that day. I leave Chiapas, determined to dedicate myself to social justice work and go to the best place that I thought of for that, and actually go to divinity school. All the people, the models around me in Chiapas, who gave me the strength to work in a really incredibly challenging situation where the army was attempting to just do all sorts of unpleasant things in the low-intensity warfare that they were using against the local populations. And all the people who were really working there were liberation theologians, so folks who had been motivated by their religious beliefs and by the teachings of this Jesus character, the first century Jewish peasant rabbi, and his teachings of love and service. So off to divinity school I go and find there again this real Jesus, but the result of that, ironically, is that I almost convert to Judaism because I understand that the Jesus that I knew and understood and loved was someone who would have everyone around into their table. They would even have me, golden boy with whatever was inside of him. And in that moment, in those moments, when I was also voted least likely to work in a church, which I took as a real badge of honor from these former soon-to-be priests, I was asked, why was I looking for human rights violations in Mexico? Why don't you just look down the street at the Cambridge Street jail? And it was there that I began then a very different life of service. A life where I worked in teams surrounded by people who were mirrors to me of who I really was, so that I couldn't pretend that I was in fact a fraud. They showed me, they helped me to see through this service, through working all together, that in fact there was real gift and beauty there. So I'm so grateful for the journey that brought me here to you, to mirrors who show me the goodness of a life of service. So, thanks.